Homage to the Triple Gem. So I was asked a question on Discord maybe about a week ago or so now, 4 or 5 days ago. And the question was, do I know anybody personally who has attained the Jhanas or a stream entry or noble attainment and is a lay person? And if I do, then what do I think some of the factors are that led them to be able to attain that in the modern day with all of its distractions and inconveniences and timetables and these kind of things? So first of all, I have to start by saying that there's a caveat, which is that basically there's a sutta called the Migasala Sutta. And in that sutta, the Buddha makes it clear that only a Tathagata or one like a Tathagata can really judge other people. So of course that doesn't mean that you can't make inferences, that you don't have faith that people may have a jhana or have attained a noble attainment. But unless one is a Tathagata, then one really can't know about a person completely in a 100% accurate way. So, there's actually a story in the Thai forest tradition about one of the most kind of famous monks in the Thai forest tradition. He was well regarded and believed to have psychic powers. And there was another monk that he essentially said that he was an arahant. He said, such and such a monk doesn't have any more work to do. He doesn't have any kilesas, something like this. And that monk said that at the time that he made that prediction, or he said that, made that assessment, that he actually wasn't an arahant at that time. He later became an arahant, that monk in question. So if one of the most highly regarded monks in modern Thailand, believed to be an arahant, believed to have psychic powers, could make a mistake assessing another person's level of Dhamma, whether they have a noble attainment or not. Of course, that could apply to just about anybody. So with that caveat, I can say that I have faith and that, one can make an inference that I've met people who are lay people who have the jhanas and or have at least some of them, or perhaps even are noble disciples. When I went to Thailand, I was sent to Thailand by my teacher when I was a 2 vasa monk. No, not 2. I was 3 vasa at the time, something like this, 2 to 3 vasa, depending on how you count when the vasas start or finish. And I remember going there, and it was so hardcore. Just as an example, when I first got there, they showed me this kuti, and the monk who was showing me asked if I wanted a pillow. And I said, yeah, I'll have a pillow. Because as if, there's no pillow already in the kuti. And he said, and we were talking more, and I kind of joked around. I said, well, I thought you guys are really hardcore. He asked, I thought maybe you weren't using pillows here. And he said, well, some of us are. So he didn't use a pillow, and I think some of the monks there didn't use pillows at all. They just used their sangati. And I got into the kuti, and it was just this empty kuti with a mat spread on the floor. And that's the indication of what the culture was like there, very hardcore. And it was an international monastery, so there was a number of monks from different countries staying in the monastery, and there was this once-a-year event where all the international monks have to give a little Dhamma talk to the lay people, like 5 minutes each, something like this. And before the Dhamma talk started, the abbot said to us, basically just tell them where you're from, tell them like a little bit about the monastery where you ordained and maybe your country. He said, don't try to teach them the Dhamma because they know more than you. They've heard the Dhamma from Ajahn Chah. Some of them have psychic powers. So, don't bother trying to teach them the Dhamma. And they would have these all-night sittings at this particular monastery, from time to time. I think they were optional at that time. They had been mandatory a couple of years earlier to do that once a week. And you go there to these all-night sittings, and there'd be some monks there, and then there'd be a group sometimes of lay people, these like old grannies, and they'd be there meditating all night in their mosquito nets and looking like they're meditating pretty well. So I didn't really have any trouble having faith that some of these lay people in this at this monastery who are coming there to meditate all night, coming to offer dana, may have psychic powers, may have the jhanas, may be noble disciples. Of course, you can't say. As far as Westerners, then yes, as well, I would say I have faith. I could infer that some of them that I've met have achieved the jhanas, and especially there's kind of one person in particular, and she had been kind of like almost confirmed, not officially, but the advice that a really respected teacher gave her kind of indicated that she'd attained to the third jhana at least. And even I've met lay practitioners. There's another lay practitioner I met who was a gentleman, and he actually had psychic powers. He could see devas, and presumably was very good at the jhanas as well. And these were just people that you might just meet on the street, and you wouldn't know any of this about them. In the case of the gentleman who had psychic powers, he was kind of like embarrassed about it almost, or like, kind of like worried that people would think he was crazy. So unfortunately, that's a part of Western culture, that these things are unusual, they're weird, and so people who have skill in them will sometimes try to hide them because they're afraid of their reputation getting damaged, which is a reasonable fear in some cases. So as far as what leads people to be able to achieve these things, if there's any common elements, it's really hard to say, like, from a Western perspective. But one of the things that's probably a big influencer, which is not the only influencer, is actually people's past karma. And you kind of say that, and it can come across like, okay, well, you're a lay person, you want to strive for the highest goals. Well, it's all dependent on your past karma. I mean, that's obviously not the case. But past karma plays a larger role than people might consider. Even the inclination to listen to the Buddha's teachings, even the opportunities that people have to encounter the Dhamma can be shaped to a much stronger degree than they might be aware of by their past karma. So, for example, when a Buddha arises, or a very influential teacher arises in the world, there's groups of people that actually arise with them. Like arise means here being born. They get born at the same time, and sometimes in similar regions to the Buddha or to the very charismatic teacher, because of the karmic links that they formed in the past, and because of their particular vows. So the teacher, whoever the Buddha, or in some cases maybe also a very skilled and charismatic teacher, will be the spearhead of that. They are the ones who lead the way and essentially set the wheel rolling and start to establish a culture. But the people who are around them, who are able to attain very, very quickly, in some cases when they, in the modern era, there's been monks who are very skilled, can remember their past lives. I mean, their past lives are sometimes quite exceptional. Like they may be like historical figures. I mean, you can even recognize if one were to say some of the names, you might even recognize the names of these people. And they've made all this very incredibly good karma in the past. And so they're born through the mechanisms of karma at the time when there will be a renaissance, when there'll be a really good opportunity for them to practice. So they already have this past parami, and they're kind of like these horses that are waiting at the gate. You just open the gate and they go. Not to disrespect, of course, the venerables in question. I think that metaphor actually came to mind from the Buddha. So they're past karma, the people who just kind of sit down and they achieve jhanas, or they achieve noble attainments right away. A lot of that can have to do with their past karma. Of course, it's not the only factor. So one of the really important things in terms of factors that people can control is the culture that a person chooses to associate with. Now, of course, this can also be a part of the past karma. I mean, you're born into a particular place and you're just there, and that's where the epicenter of a Buddhist renaissance or an epicenter of a period of very successful practice among large numbers of people occur. But we also now, especially in the modern day, have the ability to choose which culture we associate with. Culture here essentially means the norms that exist in a group of people, and that those norms are ones that are pushing that group towards greater and greater efforts, greater and greater achievements in the Dhamma. So that was one of the things that I noticed in Thailand, which was that when I got there, there were things that people were doing there that I had never even thought of doing. you had to finish eating your food in like 15 minutes, and that was your only meal of the day. And I'd be like trying to sneak some juice from the meal and like drink it later, and they'd already closed off all the loopholes, so there was no way to do that. And so much of the culture was built around putting forth effort and enduring and just spending long hours in meditation. And teachers were there. Teachers were around in that culture who had done this and done it to an extreme level and had gotten really excellent results from it. So being in that culture was almost like you were pushed, like a person was pushed to strive, pushed to meditate, pushed to put forth effort. And obviously that's going to be something that's really conducive. So for lay people, there's a list of things that leads to the decline of lay people in the Anguttara Nikaya. And a lot of the things in that list have to do with lay people not associating with bhikkhus. It's kind of like they don't want to associate with them. They're suspicious of bhikkhus. They listen to the Dhamma with a mind bent on criticism. They have like faith in people who are outside of Buddhism, and they kind of give gifts to those people first. So it's kind of a big list of things. You're imagining a lay person who maybe is born a Buddhist or something, kind of a little bit resentful, or has become a Buddhist but is suspicious. In the modern era, where that can come in more is that a person hears or they think, okay, lay people can achieve the noble attainments, and then they develop a kind of like competitive or like antagonistic attitude towards the monastic sangha, towards the bhikkhu, and I guess now as well there's bhikkhuni monasteries, let's just say to the monastic sangha. And this is an attitude that can have like historical roots in the West, especially coming from Protestantism, and also this kind of like competition thing. Like people see, well, I'm not going to put myself lower than than anybody else. I'm going to strive, and I'm going to, it's like almost like a competition. So that actually leads to the decline of a lay follower, as it said in the suttas. One of the reasons is because of the culture that any professional class creates. Now, obviously, kind of like as a monk, it's not, the monastic culture that the Buddha created is not one where there's some kind of like lords who are like oppressing people. Almost any specialization in any culture is a reflection of the values of that culture and what they want to spearhead in terms of like moving the culture forward. Like, what are the spearheads of that culture? And wherever you have a professional class, so like somebody who's a class of people who their full-time job is to do X, then the skills that they spearhead tend to permeate through the rest of the culture. So, this is something that I noticed as a young guy growing up in Canada. Science was, one of the premier kind of, call it a philosophy, one of the premier values in society at that time. And knowledge of science was really widespread. I kind of remember my mother, she would always come to me, it seemed to happen relatively frequently. Oh, they found this out in a new study. And oh, they found this out in a new study. Now you should do this. Okay, you should eat food like this. These things are nutritious, and you need to take these vitamins, or anything. There's a number of, they're always coming out with new studies. So I would hear about these things, and this was because of the respect that Western culture had for science. And as a result, knowledge of science was diffused throughout the culture. So, if you want to, you can become a scientist. You can study to become a scientist. It's not like, that's something that's like totally blocked off in Western culture to only a particular class of people. And in a similar way, the monastic sangha is there. If people want to join the monastic sangha, they can. If they want to be meditating all the time, they can. But more importantly, in terms of this sutta, is what happens when you have a culture where there's groups of people who are dedicated full time to achieving a particular goal, ideally, is that creates a counterculture from the main culture. So what can happen if a layperson stops associating with the bhikkhu, starts to press out on my own, that's fine, but it's very, very difficult. And what tends to happen in the aggregate is that actually the Dhamma gets dumbed down. It's kind of rather than people starting to buck the culture and change things and become more and more renunciant, they start making more and more accommodations to the culture, in which case you start to get teachings that are pretty watered down in terms of what the noble attainments are, in terms of what the jhanas are. Pretty watered down teachings, kind of, you feel, I don't know, it's kind of, I was reading one, I read one a while ago, and it was this fellow was saying that he, came out of a retreat, and, he was focusing on the present moment, and then it was like a bunch of shudders, like, he had moment, 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 moment. And then he said, that's the sixth level of meditative concentration. It's kind of, kind of pretty watered down. There's a number of watered down teachings about what constitutes stream entry. Like, you just have faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and you keep the 5 precepts. And, at some point you're doing that and you're a stream enterer. So that's what tends to happen when a person, when there's a culture that develops in opposition to, say, like a professional monastic culture. It tends to be the case if there is this antagonism that, monks and lay people are in competition or something somehow, then the cultures that develop that try to like prove that, it's just as easy to do this as a lay person as a monk, you don't have to sacrifice anything. They actually tend to dumb down the Dhamma. So for lay people who are really serious about moving forward in their path and their practice, that is what I noticed in Thailand. The lay people who were these extremely good practitioners, they had an association with a monastery, with a place where there was a counterculture, and with a tradition that had many people in it who had successfully reached the goals that they'd set their hearts on. So obviously, associating closely like that, there's going to be a number of benefits, both the culture that you get through osmosis, and then also if you actually develop a personal relationship with a teacher, you think about what they would think of you. It's kind of you're doing something, and so, well, what would they think? Kind of. I think that's just a human characteristic. Whoever you associate with, when you go to do something, you tend to like do this maybe quick subconscious evaluation what the people in your group would think of you for behaving in way X, Y, or Z, and you want to behave in a way that would look good, would make you look good in the eyes of the people who you respect, admire, and care about. So for that reason, it's good if you can. One of the best, most conducive things is to find a culture where people are striving for the Dhamma. As the Buddha recommends, if one is a lay person, to associate closely with monastics, with monasteries, with those cultures. It doesn't mean you have to live there in a friendly way. I mean, not in an antagonistic way. It doesn't mean you have to be like I don't know. It's not really like it's not like an oppressive hierarchy or anything like this. It's like kind of friendly, and in the same way you would associate with people you care and like about. You go to a monastery, find a place where there's people who are striving sincerely, and associate with them like you would associate with your family or your friends. I mean, obviously you're not going to chill out in the same way that you do at a monastery, but those same feelings are there in a way, kind of friendliness and care. And using those feelings to establish connections with places like that is probably going to be one of the biggest supports to achieving these things as a layperson. Because when you start to practice sincerely, it's going to take you away from your lay life, and the people that you relied on for support will maybe start to turn away from you a little bit. And kind of, you're not doing the stuff with them that they find interesting. And kind of remember when I first came to start practicing, I was smoking marijuana, partying, and these things. And I stopped smoking marijuana, stopped drinking. And you stop smoking marijuana, right there you lose a lot of the connection that you have with your friends. Almost everything that we were doing was revolving around smoking marijuana. Kind of, that was like one of the central pillars. So when you come to practice, you do kind of lose to a degree your connections that you had with other people. And so what you want to do is to replace those in a wholesome way with connections with people who share the ideals that you have, striving on the path. So that does seem to be one of the biggest factors, because where you hear about the most lay people achieving these things is places where there's a professional class, like monks or monastics, who are achieving them as well. And there's a close association between those lay people and those monastics. So that's probably going to be the biggest factor. Another important thing that comes through really clearly in the suttas, but is rarely practiced. Actually, until a couple of years ago, I was always saying, I've never met anybody who practices this. This takes on this practice, which I'll describe in a moment. But I was very happy that actually in the last couple of years, somebody I know has taken it on fully, all the time, and another person has taken it on another two people are doing that regularly. So I'm very happy that have associations with people like that. And that practice, as recommended for lay people in the suttas, is to keep the 8 precepts once a week. So that can be a surprisingly powerful thing in terms of pulling one away from one's attachments to the things in the world. I remember when I was a young man, kind of liked to work out and lift weights and these kind of things. And I was living at a Zen temple, and I decided I would take on this practice of keeping the 8 precepts once a week. So I did. And I noticed that I quickly started to lose muscle mass. I mean, working out and trying to become have a really big body, you have to maintain that, and you have to eat a lot of food. I mean, you're not going to become buff as a monk, just eating 2 meals a day, and especially not eating 1 meal a day. You're going to be thin. There's no way around that. There's absolutely no way around that if one is keeping to the 8 precepts. One will definitely be losing weight and will not have bodybuilder-like muscles. In general, just not enough nutrition there. So I started to do this once a week, and my muscles shrank. I still look kind of normal, but didn't look like really fit. And that's a time of your life when young men and young women are chasing after each other. And there was this girl who was interested in me, and she came up to me and said, she said to me one time, she's like, "You have to get bigger than me." And she pointed to this picture that there was of me back when I was working out more and wasn't keeping the 8 precepts. And kind of like the way that I looked at that time. So naturally what will happen is that in keeping these 8 precepts, it will pull a person away from the world in ways that are more significant than one would anticipate. And kind of one's muscles will shrink. One isn't engaging in entertainment. I mean, right there is a huge reason that people get together. I mean, usually people don't get together just to talk. I mean, we can do that. But and if you're keeping the ways of wholesome speech, then usually people run out of stuff to talk about. Then they start talking about negative things, which is so. There's going to pull a person back from the world significantly, and kind of to not engage in entertainment, to not eat afternoon, to not engage, put on makeup and engage in beautification, and to sleep on a low bed. That's one that can be surprisingly powerful. I mean, if you sleep on the floor on a mat, you kind of stop caring as much, like how luxurious your curtains or whatever it is might be. Somehow it makes your surroundings matter a lot less if you sleep on the floor. On a mat or put your bed on the floor. So these are very, very powerful practices that will tend to pull a person away from the world. And in pulling a person away from the world, what it does is it makes space in the mind for one's meditation to grow. One of the big things that can halt a person's practice as a lay person is that there's so many opportunities in lay life to become attached to things. And this is beyond just the 8 precepts. It's just the various ways that the mind can go out and become attached to things in a way that has nothing to do with the Dhamma. And the whole culture, I mean, lay culture is built around that, kind of non-monastic culture. It's built for that. Western culture is essentially built for sensuality. The underlying philosophy of the development of many of these technologies and these other things is that you'll be able to gain happiness when you have more sensual pleasures. You have more control over your external environment. Your external environment is more pleasant. So, I mean, there is, it's nice to have certain good things, kind of good food, and, cars are nice, you can drive them. But that philosophy in and of itself creates a lot of opportunities for the mind to become attached to things and to indulge in things in such a way that it blocks a person's meditation. So that's one of the big things that can hold up lay people, is not having this intention to renunciation. This kind of right intention in the Noble Eightfold Path. The second factor is intention of non-harming, non-ill will, and intention of renunciation. It's also there as well. So that's one of the things that can be very tricky. Now, when I was a lay person, I noticed that there'd be several times that my meditation would seem like I couldn't meditate anymore. If there were things that I felt that I should renounce, and I didn't renounce them, I didn't let go of them. The first one was marijuana, as I mentioned. Kind of had all these rational reasons why I didn't want to let it go. I believe that kind of that would have essentially blocked me. It was an easier thing to let go. And other things can come up as well. Like I had girlfriends at that time. I thought, I have to let this go. And if I want to move forward meditating. Now, those aren't going to be the same things for everybody. But the point is that that the mind can launch out and grab onto things. And when it does, that's a block for one's meditation. So the 8 precepts are much more powerful in cutting off a lot of these manifestations of craving and attachment that exist in the lay life, which has so many varied opportunities for them. So that right there is going to be another huge support. And in modern Thailand, besides all the rumored lay people who were Sotapannas, there were 3 or 4 cases actually where lay people actually were reasonably rumored to have become arahants. So in those cases, they essentially had taken on the 8 precepts permanently. So if one is a lay person, one is not a monk, that seems to more or less be one of the really supportive factors, almost like a minimum, like you take on the 8 precepts on a permanent basis if you really want to be serious about becoming an arahant. But if one is just practicing in a normal way and hoping for the jhanas, maybe hoping for a noble attainment, then just taking them on once a week may be enough, may be a really significant support. All these things are kind of amorphous. There's not really rules for them, but can say that taking on the 8 precepts is going to be a really significant support, and would be a common element as well in many of the cases, likely where we might see or reasonably have faith or reasonably infer that lay people have achieved the jhanas, achieved the noble attainment. One of the, there's going to be many things that one could think of that could be a support, but maybe the last one to discuss today that could be a real support for lay people is that actually there's a number of really serious Western lay practitioners. It's really nice to meet them actually. They are very serious, super dedicated, and they kind of structure their life around Buddhism in the sense that they sometimes decide not to have kids, and then even structure their work around their ability to practice. And this is a huge support. I mean, one of the things that also appears to be a common element for lay people is that they basically in the Buddhist time were living in an agrarian culture, and in modern Thailand as well, the work-life balance was far different than it is in the West. So I mean, if one has a job in which one is working, 10 hours a day, I mean, it's going to be hard to fit in meditation in that case. And also the nature of one's work is important. So what these people do, they kind of arrange their life so that they have time to meditate, and ideally as well, so that their job is in line with Buddhist principles, which is a huge support. So that's said one of the last things. We'll count that as a subset of this particular point. One of the things that can happen, even if one is a really serious layperson practicing, is that one can set goals or aspirations for after one, say, achieves a noble attainment. So it's like, I'm gonna practice to become a stream mentor. Maybe they're like budgeting time, give it 10 years or 15 years, or 20 years, whatever it might be. And then after that, we're going to do this and this and this. And there's this whole plan that they have, it involves, usually they're not willing to give up their spouse, not willing to give up, their job or their career. And so it starts with an assumption that lay people don't have to give these things up. So I'm going to make plans and, set limits, set conditions on what I'm willing to give up to achieve stream entry. Now, it's not going to be worded that way per se, but in the making of the plan, I mean, it's implicit that there's these things that one is not willing to give up. And that there's these conditions that one is setting for one's achievement of stream entry. So those conditions are essentially, can pose a really significant block to one's progress towards noble attainments. Because essentially, if one is trying to become a stream enterer, what one is essentially trying to do is to take a step over life and death. So it is described as taking a step over death. That also means taking a step over life. And the things that a person is attached to, that they really want to keep, really want to hold on to, these conditions, those conditions are essentially the things that make it worthwhile for a person to keep coming back and getting born, living again, essentially. So one doesn't really want to have preconditions in terms of one's attainment of the noble attainments. That has to become the primary goal that overshadows every other thing in one's life, such that one is willing to give up anything to achieve it. Doesn't mean one's going to go jump off a cliff, but mentally one doesn't care so much about the things that used to give one joy. It has to extend until anything in the world is essentially seen as a danger, and that one's desire for something beyond is stronger than one's desire for life. So in all the various cases where you read about people achieving stream entry, their dedication and their desire for something beyond is essentially at a level where they're willing to take a step beyond everything. Because for stream enters, there's a number of conditions that they're given in the canon. I mean, they have 7 more lives. They can't hide an offense. They're incapable of decline. It's kind of, there's also places in canon where it talks about stream enters can be heedless. So you have to put all these things together. But when you stack them all up, I mean, you're imagining a life where you don't have the same capacity to just decide, I'm going to run a business after this and keep doing it till this time, then I'll go practice. There's conditions now. There's limitations on what you're able to do in order to be reaching this goal within 7 lives. And the canon doesn't go into a lot of detail about that, but you can imagine that there's a lot more in reality for the experience of people who achieve that noble attainment. So really different life after than there was before, and increased limitations on what one is capable of. So it's actually, that may be what actually can cause a significant block. Would people really want that? I mean, would you want it if, say, one day intuitively you came to know that, okay, I've been practicing and, things are fine, and now it's time for me to separate from my husband or wife and go become a monk or nun. And, that was something you had to do. Was that something that you would want? So there are consequences to noble attainments, and it can be good to consider what the Buddha said in the canon and what that would mean in terms of setting goals and setting limitations of what one is willing to give up in order to achieve these noble attainments. So the long and short of it is that noble attainments, the jhanas, will be possible in any time. That's why the Dhamma is a kaliko for lay people, for monastics, for whoever strives, for whoever puts the appropriate causes into place. In terms of supporting factors in the modern era, past karma is going to be a really big one. Can't really control that. Present karma, what you do now, associating with a culture, with good people, with traditions in which striving for the Dhamma is encouraged. It's a good thing. Ideally, there's people there who have already achieved these goals, is going to be an enormous support and appears to be possibly the strongest of the elements, and one that supports all of the other sub-elements that we discussed today. So if one can find that, good to look for it and try to associate, and that can be a huge support. Keeping the 8 precepts once a week comes across very strongly recommended in the canon. That's also going to be a huge support. A lot harder than most people would think to do. I was chatting with a gentleman. We've been kind of having chats back and forth, or not back and forth really, but once talking on the phone. And basically we've been discussing like how difficult it is to give up attachment to one's body, especially if one is working out. Kind of, in this case, this particular gentleman is a very athletic guy, and I I can kind of relate to how difficult it is to give up the desire to work out, the desire, to have a body that's really, really strong, really, really fit. Because before I became a monk, I was really into those things. Say pretty into them. So keeping the 8 precepts will pull one back from that. It'll pull one back from entertainment, pull one back from one's life, and that'll create space in the mind that can help to stop this, these kind of like sticky burrs or thorns that snag one's clothing and prevent one from going forward as a layperson. And also it's very good as well to not really be, if one really wants to achieve a noble attainment, not to put conditions on that. Like, for example, one thinks, I want to be a stream mentor, and then after I become a stream mentor, I'm going to run this business and, do all these various things. You just leave that blank. I want a noble attainment, full stop, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to achieve it, and step into the mist and see what lies beyond that, and see what kind of things come after that. So those are a few thoughts on things that can be supportive for lay people striving for the jhanas, and for lay people striving for the noble attainments.